Yet we must remember the cost. Every Amazon's sword was forged in a society built on human trafficking. Their courage was real, but so was their complicity. To honor them honestly is to honor complexity, women who were simultaneously victims of a brutal system and among its most fearsome enforcers. In an age when history is too often reduced to slogans, the Agoge demand better. They remind us that the past is not a morality play, it is a battlefield of human choices, where heroism and horror walk hand in hand. Their voices, long silenced by conquest and condescension, deserve to be heard again, not as myth, but as memory. For in remembering the lost Amazons of Dahomey, we remember something essential about the possibilities and the perils of power in women's hands. The echoes of the Agoge today. After 1894, the surviving Agoge were disbanded. Some were absorbed into the households of French administrators, others returned to villages where they were treated as living legends. The last known survivor, a woman named Nawi, was interviewed by French anthropologists in the 1930s. She died around 1943 at an estimated age of 100. 4 decades their story was marginalized, dismissed as exotic anecdote by colonial historians, ignored by African nationalist narratives that preferred male heroes. The revival began in the 1970s with the work of Beninese historian Hélène D. Almeida Topa and American anthropologist Edna Bay. Stanley Alpen's 1998 book Amazons of Black Sparta brought them to wider attention. Since then, archaeological excavations at Dahomey, oral histories collected in Benin, and DNA studies of descendant communities have added depth to our understanding. In December 2025, as the world grapples with questions of gender, power, and historical memory, the Agoge speak with renewed urgency. They challenge simple narratives of victimhood and empowerment. They were both oppressors, slave raiders, and resistors, anti-colonial fighters. They lived in a society that granted women lethal agency while denying them motherhood. Their story refuses easy moral categorization. Modern Beninese women have begun reclaiming them. In Dahomey, the annual Vodun festival now includes reenactments by female performers dressed as Minyo. In 2023, the Beninese government announced plans for a museum of the Agoge in the former royal palace. Young feminists across Africa cite them as proof that women have always fought, ruled, and shaped history on their own terms. Clash of Empires, the Amazons versus colonialism. The true test of the Agoge came in the 1890s, when Dahomey faced the full might of French colonialism. The first Franco-Dahomeyan War, 1890, and the second, 1892 to 1894, pitted a pre-industrial kingdom of perhaps 200,000 people against a modern European power armed with repeating rifles, machine guns, and artillery. In March 1890, King Bahanzin rejected French demands to make Dahomey a protectorate. The French responded by sending a small expeditionary force under Colonel Alfred Dodds. At the Battle of Achupa on the 20th of April, 1890, 800 Agoge and 1,600 male soldiers ambushed the French column in dense forest. They inflicted heavy casualties, killing the French commander and forcing a retreat. European newspapers were stunned. Black Amazons defeat French troop. The French returned in 1892 with 2,500 well-armed troops, Senegalese tirailleurs, and 2 Krupp-field guns. The decisive campaign began in September. At the Battle of Dogba on the 4th of October, the Agoge launched a dawn assault, charging across open ground into Maxim gunfire. Eyewitnesses described them advancing in perfect order, singing, until the ground was littered with their dead. One French officer wrote, "They came on as if they were immortal." On the 17th of November, 1892, after weeks of siege, Dahomey fell. Bahanzin fled into the interior with the remaining Agoge. The last organized resistance occurred in January 1894 at Adigan, where several hundred Amazons made a final stand. When their ammunition ran out, they charged with machetes and were annihilated. King Bahanzin surrendered in February 1894. The kingdom of Dahomey ceased to exist. The French counted over 2,000 Dahomeyan dead in the final campaign, a significant proportion of them women. Yet even in defeat, the Agoge earned grudging respect. General Dodds wrote in his official report, "The Amazons fought with extraordinary courage. I have never seen troops behave with such contempt for death." Inside the palace, they were political actors of the first order. As the king's wives, they were forbidden to bear children. Any pregnancy was punished by death, which removed them from normal kinship networks and bound them exclusively to the monarch. Senior officers held titles such as Capogito, the king's mother warrior, or Emigan, leopard of the king. They sat on the king's council, voted in succession disputes, and could veto royal decisions. When King Bahanzin came to power in 1889, the Agoji commander, Sedong Hongbei, led the delegation that placed the crown on his head, an honor normally reserved for the highest male officials. Individual stories of heroism abound. Nawi, captured as a child from the Mahi in the 1830s, rose to command a battalion and was famed for killing a leopard with her bare hands. In 1864, during the reign of Gliel, an Amazon named Dahomey single-handedly held a breached gate at the Battle of Adigan, allowing the main army to regroup. She died of her wounds but was posthumously promoted. European accounts often mention the bladed Amazons who carried razor-sharp machetes between their teeth while climbing walls. Training emphasized endurance, pain tolerance, and absolute obedience. Recruits slept on the ground, ate sparse meals, and practiced daily with muskets, machetes, and clubs. They learned to scale thorn-covered walls barehanded, to march for days with minimal water, and to charge into gunfire while singing. Mock battles were fought with real blades. Scars were badges of honor. The most feared exercise involved charging through a human wall of captives tied together. Any hesitation meant death for the recruit. Their weaponry evolved with the times. In the 18th century they fought primarily with spears, bows, and heavy iron machetes called agbara. By the 1840s they were equipped with imported Danish muskets, bayonets, and locally forged cutlasses. They fought in loose formations, using speed and terror rather than European-style volleys. Their battle cry, "The King's Wives are coming," was designed to paralyze enemies with fear. Their indomitable impact on Dahomey. The Agoji were far more than a curiosity. They were integral to Dahomey's military and political system. In an average year they participated in two major campaigns, the Spring War against northern neighbors and the Autumn War against the Yoruba kingdoms to the east. Their presence allowed Dahomey to field larger armies than its population alone could support, because male farmers could stay home to produce food while the professional female corps did much of the fighting. They excelled at particular tasks. Their small size and agility made them ideal for night raids and ambushes. They guarded the lucrative trade routes to the coast, escorting palm oil caravans and capturing slaves for export. In 1840 they crushed a rebellion by the Mahi people in a single campaign, reportedly taking 8,000 captives. In 1851 they played a decisive role in the conquest of Wida's successor state, Orlada. European travelers who encountered them were stunned. In 1793 the British abolitionist John Atkins wrote that Dahomey's female soldiers were more athletic and strong than the men. In 1845 the British naval officer Frederick Forbes, sent to negotiate with King Gizo, described them as Amazons in the fullest sense, tall, well-made, and carried themselves like soldiers. The French missionary François Bourges-Hero in 1863 called them the terror of the country. Even their enemies feared them. The Yoruba of Abeokuta nicknamed them the King's Wild Women, and Egba oral traditions still speak with awe of the day the Minyo charged their barricades singing death songs. The path to becoming an Amazon. Recruitment into the Agoji was rarely voluntary in the modern sense, but it was not simple abduction either. Girls and women entered the regiment through several channels. As war captives, especially from raids on neighboring peoples such as the Mahi or Yoruba. As criminals or social outcasts sentenced by local courts, joining the king's army commuted their punishment. As gifts or tributes from vassal chiefs. As palace women who caught the king's eye during ceremonial dances and were married to him, effectively removing them from normal marriage and placing them in the Agoji. Very occasionally, as volunteers, usually poor girls or runaway wives seeking protection and status. Once recruited, the novice underwent a prolonged and brutal training regime that began as early as age 8 or 9 and could last a decade. The French trader Jean Bayol, who witnessed an initiation in 1889, left a chilling account. A 15-year-old girl was ordered to execute a prisoner by decapitation. She hesitated for a moment, then swung the heavy sword 3 times until the head fell. The crowd roared approval. The girl had passed her test and was now a full Minyo. An introduction to the Agoji. The kingdom of Dahomey emerged in the early 17th century on the Dahomey Plateau, roughly 100 kilometers inland from the Bight of Benin. By the 1720s, under King Agaja, r. 1718 to 1740, it had transformed from a small Fon chiefdom into a militarized, centralized state whose wealth derived primarily from the Atlantic slave trade. Dahomey's kings built a professional standing army that was rare in West Africa, where warfare was usually seasonal and conducted by part-time farmer soldiers. To maintain this army, the monarchy needed a constant supply of recruits who were absolutely loyal and could not inherit land or titles that might challenge royal authority. Women, particularly those who entered the palace as wives, captives, or criminals, were the perfect solution. The Agoji were not a spontaneous creation of feminist enlightenment. Their origins lie in the practical politics of a slave-raiding state. Early in the 18th century, King Agaja began arming palace women as bodyguards. Some sources claim the first units were formed from female elephant hunters, Beto, who already possessed martial skills. Others insist they began as a ceremonial guard that gradually took on real combat roles. By the reign of King Gizo, 1818 to 1858, however, the transformation was complete. The Agoji had become an elite shock force, sworn to celibacy, at least officially, housed in the royal palace, and answerable only to the king. The untold story of the legendary Dahomey Amazons, fierce female warriors of West Africa. In the popular imagination, the word Amazon conjures images of mythical Greek women riding across the steppe, breasts removed to draw the bow more easily, living in a matriarchal paradise far from the real world. Hollywood has reinforced this fantasy, most recently with the 2022 film The Woman King, which, while visually spectacular, took considerable creative liberties with historical fact. Yet the true Amazons were not mythical. They were not Greek. They were not even fictional. They were the Agoji, pronounced Argoji, or Minyo, our mothers in Fon, the all-female military regiment of the Kingdom of Dahomey in what is now the Republic of Benin. For almost 2 centuries, from the early 18th century until the kingdom's fall in 1894, these women formed one of the most formidable fighting forces in pre-colonial Africa. At their height in the 1840s under King Gizo, they numbered between 4,000 and 6,000, sometimes a third of Dahomey's entire army, and were universally regarded by European observers as more disciplined, courageous, and ruthless than their male counterparts. This essay seeks to restore the Agoji to their rightful place in world history, not as exotic curiosities or feminist propaganda, but as complex historical actors who embodied the contradictions of their society. A slave-trading kingdom that armed women to capture other Africans, a patriarchal monarchy that granted elite women extraordinary autonomy, and an African state that resisted European imperialism longer and more fiercely than almost any other. Their story is one of agency and coercion, glory and horror, resistance and complicity. To tell it properly is to confront the full spectrum of human experience in one of the most remarkable military institutions the world has ever seen. Unveiling the lost Amazons of Dahomey Kingdom. Imagine an army so fierce, so legendary, that European powers trembled at their name. But these weren't men, they were the Dahomey Amazons, an all-female military unit whose valor shaped an entire kingdom. How did these extraordinary warriors rise to power, and what secrets did they hold that allowed them to resist an empire? Forget everything you think you know about ancient warfare. 4 centuries, a forgotten legend lay buried, the untold story of the Dahomey Amazons. These weren't just women, they were an elite fighting force that dominated West Africa, proving that strength and strategy know no gender, especially when defending their homeland against colonial conquest. You think you know history? Prepare to have your mind blown. We're about to uncover the mind-boggling true story of the Dahomey Amazons, the legendary female warriors whose ferocity and strategic brilliance made them the backbone of a powerful West African kingdom. Get ready to witness a legacy of power, resistance, and absolute awe-inspiring strength that's been hidden for too long.